What happened to the men who committed treason by signing the Declaration of Independence? We'll get to that in a minute. But first, let's talk about the 4th of July, the day commemorating the signing, right? Not so much. It's actually the day the document was adopted or approved. It wouldn't actually be signed for almost another month, around August 2nd. But on July 5th, copies were made without the signatures and distributed throughout the 13 colonies to incite that patriotic spirit and get people amped up to fight for their freedom. When a copy reached New York, it found its way into the hands of none other than George Washington, the newly appointed commander of the Continental Army. He seized the opportunity to take this document, go to City Hall, go up to the top steps, gather a huge crowd around, and read the document aloud, knowing full well hundreds of British ships were sitting nearby in the New York harbor. His motivation was clear. Let's get that patriotic spirit going, and it had its effect because actually a riot would end up breaking out as colonists sat there and listened to him read the long list of grievances against King George in Parliament. By the end of the day, the crowd was so amped up, they pulled down the statue of King George III, melted it, and turned it into 42,000 musket balls, little tiny bullets, to be aimed at the British in their fight for independence. Back to the signers. So what happened to those treasonous men? Surely there was a price on their head for signing that document, and there was, but realistically, the British didn't have the resources to go on a manhunt in that time period, and they are engaged in fighting a war. So the only person who was actually targeted for signing the document was Richard Stockton of New Jersey. He was dragged from his bed in the middle of the night, not by British soldiers, but by his neighbors who decided to remain loyal to the crown. They put him in jail, intentionally starved him for 5 months, and subjected him to freezing cold weather. While he was in jail, British General Cornwallis occupied his home and basically burnt or destroyed all of his belongings. He would never fully recover from what happened to him in jail, and he would end up dying before the end of the war. Button Gwinnett. I love saying that name. Button Gwinnett. He was one of 8 signers who were actually born in England. Unfortunately, Button came to an early demise less than a year after signing, but if I'm being honest, it was his own dang fault. Here's why. A political rival of his had the nerve to challenge Button's honor in public. That never happens today, does it? Button decided to challenge him to a duel. You know that thing where 2 people stand back to back, walk 10 paces, turn, face each other, and shoot their weapons? Well, Button got the short end of that stick. While both were wounded, Button died of his wounds 3 days later. Let's talk numbers. 4 of the signers were captured and imprisoned while fighting in the war, treated harshly, but all survived. 12 of the signers had their homes ransacked, looted, vandalized, and burned. Abraham Clark, no relation, had 2 sons captured and put on a prison ship, just about the worst thing that could happen aside from being killed, which is what happened to another signer's son in the Battle of Germantown. In total, 9 signers died during the course of the war for various reasons, which means 47 lived, if my math is right. What happened to the men who lived? Too many to talk about, but here's a snippet. They became judges, senators, even presidents. Some who lost their fortunes during the course of the war were able to rebuild them. Some were less fortunate. Carter Braxton had a massive fortune in the shipping industry. Unfortunately, during the war, the British sunk or captured so many of his ships, he never fully regained the financial loss he incurred. Legend has it that Thomas Nelson encouraged George Washington to fire on his own home in Yorktown at the end of the war because it was now a British headquarters. So cannons were fired and one went through a window and landed on the dining room table where British officers had just sat down for dinner. One general was killed, several others were wounded. I'm thinking you call that a bullseye. Benjamin Franklin, gotta mention him. Businessman, writer, publisher, scientist, diplomat, legislator, social activist, to name more than a few, he was one of the earliest advocates for abolishing slavery and protecting the rights of Native Americans. Let's end with John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, two incredibly intelligent men who had a healthy respect for each other and a strong friendship all during the war years. But as the young nation got off the ground and Adams and Jefferson were elected as our second and third presidents, they became bitter rivals. They did not agree on how the country should be run as the first political parties began to emerge. The good news is, by the end of their lives, they were able to set their political differences aside and they rekindled their friendship the last 14 years by writing letters to each other on a consistent basis. Here's the kicker. They both died on the same day. It wasn't just any day, it was the 4th of July. And it wasn't just any 4th of July, it was the 50th anniversary commemorating the adopting of the Declaration of Independence. Adams' final words were, "Thomas Jefferson survives." Actually, Jefferson had died 5 hours earlier. I'm Julie Clark, the history teller. If you liked the story, like the story. Subscribe, set the notification thingy, and get ready to go on a field trip because we're going to a Civil War prison in Georgia. I'll see you there.